These days in Canada, I think it's about every day we hear the absolute dumbest thing in our entire lives, often coming out of the face of an NDP or a Liberal MP, sometimes that being Prime Minister Justin Trudeau himself. These people do not have their feet firmly planted on the ground, and yet they are currently in government in Canada, despite the fact that these people have the political priorities and beliefs of 18-year-old anthropology students who aren't even particularly good. Laurel Collins is getting my award for the dumbest comment ever for this statement that she made in a committee meeting yesterday, going on a rant about how climate change is gendered and how she is rightfully hysterical about the issues when really she just wants to give in to her wanting to ruin your entire standard of living through massive taxes and regulations on energy. Check this out.
I want to start off by addressing one of the comments that was made by the witnesses around climate hysterics. Hysteria, it refers to something that is wildly emotional. It comes from the Greek word womb, of the womb. It is used in ancient Greek to refer to things associated with women. And I hope you'll forgive me if I get emotional.
I'm not going to forgive you. You're an elected official. The funny thing is that the people who cry about sexism the most and are the strongest feminists are the ones who lean into being emotionally not in control the most. I always find it's some NDP or Liberal MP who plays the card that, well, you guys are being sexist, but I'm emotional because I'm a woman who has to deal with a lot. This is just weakness. It's just weakness. It's not because you're a woman. That's, if anything, sexist for you to suggest that you're only emotional about this because of the fact that you're a woman and this is affecting women all around the planet. You're not. You're not an adult. That's why you're having an emotional breakdown in a committee meeting where you're supposed to be professional and all business all the time.
Climate emergencies are not gender neutral. The degradation of ecosystems disproportionately impacts women and girls. And I am wildly emotional.
Stop it then.
This is the existential crisis of our time. And to hear that we're asking for high ambition is climate hysteria.
It is. You are modeling it perfectly right now, Laura. Again, what she is saying is that please respect my tears, my huffy energy, and please ruin the energy industry. Can you just please pay 40% more in your energy bill over the next year? Can you please pay triple the amount in the next 10 years? Because we need to tackle the climate change emergency. Is there maybe problems with the climate? Sure. Also, none of what she's suggesting would help at all. It's just her wanting to use emotion in order to argue in favor of points that she does not actually have the facts to back up. She does not actually have a plan to reduce emissions that would actually make people more prosperous in the long run. She simply wants you to give in to her, passing more taxes, more regulations on the back of the idea that you're a big old sexist if you don't want to do it, even though she's mad at people for using the word hysteria because that's supposedly sexist. Because when we go back to the fossil record, it's somewhat associated with women. But then she also wants to play the card that I'm a woman and you must now listen to me. This is why nobody likes the NDP and the Liberals.
That makes me wildly emotional. Absolutely. When I think about my womb, the 2 children that I bore from that womb and what future we are leaving them, I am wildly emotional. And it's not surprising to hear this from someone who has written articles that are pro-life.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. Pro-life? Pro-life? You mean like how you were pro-life when you had your 2 kids? Everyone's pro-life fundamentally. The idea that we're now going to clutch our pearls because a witness was pro-life is just silly, and it's going to make more people pro-life when this is the lady who is holding up the pro-choice end of the argument.
I think that we need to think about the intersection of gender and the climate crisis. And I hope that the people around this table and the people listening will refrain from using language like climate hysteria.
Oh my goodness. You were just using it and calling yourself hysterical in a positive sense. Look at her hands.
We are facing a climate emergency.
This is somebody who's just not equipped to being in parliament. sad news. I looked up on 338 the projections for her riding. She's probably going to hold on to the seat. Does she deserve it? No. Is she a serious person? Not at all. She is an activist who snuck into parliament and is here to talk about how we need to destroy our economy because then we might be able to reduce global emissions by 0.1%. This is nonsense. The Liberals have not reduced emissions. The NDP Liberal coalition government over the past 5 years hasn't reduced emissions, because if they actually were serious about reducing emissions, they would take on my plan, which would just be deregulating natural gas and letting local communities use the most local and efficient form of energy possible, because that's actually how the US reduced its emissions. I don't really put that high a value on reducing emissions because I think that human prosperity and standard of living come before abstract notions about how we can affect the climate. But if you do want to reduce emissions while making people better off at the same time, let them use the energy they actually want to use. By forcing people to use wind and solar, not only are you making power bills go up, but you're making the power grids less efficient. You are actually requiring coal and other forms of power to stick around longer because they need to be supplemented by those power sources, because green and solar do not work that well. This is why people in Ontario pay so much money for energy right now. It's because 8% of the grid is mandated to be solar and wind. And because solar and wind has a very difficult time ramping up for high capacity or for large energy needs, because it's not always sunny and it's not always windy, it's actually requiring more energy to be burned, because 8% of the grid must always be supplied by green energy. That means at night they have to store solar so that they can be continuing to provide solar at night. So they have to burn a 1-to-1 ratio of coal in order to save 1 unit of solar. They have to burn 1 unit of natural gas to store 1 unit of wind, because you need to burn a kilowatt hour to store kilowatt hour. It's completely nutty. And in order to incentivize providers to bring green energy onto the grid, they pay wildly more amounts of taxpayer money in order to incentivize these companies to do it. So while natural gas in Ontario is being provided on the grid at a compensation rate of 7-8 cents per kilowatt hour, green and green energy, wind and solar, are getting like 40 cents. They're getting like 42 cents a kilowatt hour to provide this, even though it's supposedly such a cheap form of energy. It's only cheap when you take all the subsidies out of, you just don't assume that those cost anything for some reason. That's when they're cheap. But when you think of all the extra infrastructure you need to compensate for the failings of green and wind plus the subsidies, that 8% in Ontario is now more than 50% of your power bills. If they actually just clear cut all of the windmills, got rid of the solar panels, and went back to coal and natural gas, emissions would probably go down and power bills would go down. Same thing in Alberta. They need to get coal power plants back up online. The province should just be paying whatever low amount of money they can get for whatever power they can get. Take whatever power onto the grid, and we will actually lower emissions and also, costs and emissions, rather than forcing ourselves to use a certain amount of green energy that is just not market efficient and also requires extra carbon emitting infrastructure in order to sustain it. It's completely wacky, but in the world of Laurel Collins, this is just pesky details that can be overcome by getting hysterical on camera and demanding that we give way to her climate emergency type views, where pretty much anything is justified in order to slightly reduce emissions. Like, this lady would be perfectly willing to make poor people much worse off, as long as that she got to say at the end of the year, that we reduced 2% emissions this year. Wow, aren't we fantastic? That should be it for me today, guys. If you want to donate to our legal fund, it's the Give, Send, Go link in the description below. If you live in the riding of Calgary Signal Hill, I am running for the Calgary Signal Hill Conservative Party nomination. The deadline for memberships closed a while ago, but if you're a member and you live in this riding, make sure to mark me number 1 on your ballot. Mark Michael Kim number 2, and I'll probably release a more full list later. I think I have a very good chance to win. At the same time, you always want to hedge your bets with other people that you think, I didn't win, I would want this other person to win instead. Have a good one, everyone.